convicted of murder when I was a young girl. I have been an inmate for 15 long years. If there has been a crime, people want a guilty person. Rightly or wrongly does not matter.
And you've given up hope of being set free?
I saved my hopes for smaller matters. I live in hopes of having a better breakfast tomorrow than I had today.
I'm a doctor. I work with the mind. It is not a question of your guilt or innocence that concerns me. I simply wish to know what you yourself can actually remember.
I've lost part of my memory entirely.
I hope that sooner or later we will bring back your memory.
I'm not at all sure I want it back. When I close my eyes, I can remember every detail of that house. The same sort of work from dawn to dusk. Always a mistress ordering me a bite.
I'd like you to scrub this floor.
Stupid whore.
It's strange to reflect that of all the people living in that house, I was the only one of them left alive in 6 months' time.
Have you developed your own theories regarding her sanity?
She could be a true amnesiac. Or simply guilty.
You are surrounded by dangers here.
Grace said she heard a dead speak to her.
Let me in. They thought you could find answers. It is knowledge of me you crave, Doctor. Knowledge with a lurid glare to it. Knowledge gained through a descent into the pit. You want to go where I can never go. How can I be a murderer?
Hi, thank you.
Congratulations.
This is super awkward. Should I just sit in profile while we have this here?
We should stand next to it, actually. Congratulations on this. This is amazing.
Thank you.
This is a mini-series produced and directed by two incredible women, Sarah Polley and Mary Herron, and starring you, another incredible woman.
Thank you.
How did this... Oh, and also based on the best-selling novel by Margaret Atwood.
Who's she?
The most incredible. So how did you get involved with this? What was it like when you first got approached to do this or got told you were going to be able to do this?
Well, I had heard that Sarah was adapting Margaret's novel, and I thought immediately, even before reading anything, I want to be a part of it because I grew up watching Sarah Polley on Road to Avonlea and watched her kind of transition into this really cool indie actress and then writer-director, and I'd been following her career for so long that she was always somebody that I had in hoping in my heart and in my head that I would one day be able to work with her. And then I sat down with Sarah and Mary to speak about the project for the first time. And Sarah looked at me and said, I tried to option this novel when I was 17, and it's one of my favorite pieces of literature, and I think it somehow informed everything I've ever done creatively. And I kind of thought, oh my God, that's so much pressure. This is before I even auditioned for it. So I knew how special it was to her and how important it was to her who was going to be Grace.
And how did they come up with, because Sarah's directed before and she's adapting it. What made her go to Mary to direct the series rather than Sarah direct the series? I mean, Mary is amazing. For those that don't know, Mary Herron directed I Shot Andy Warhol, American Psycho. She's an incredible director.
Yeah, I mean, Mary is so incredible, and obviously I got to spend so much time with her when we made this project together. But I think Mary is really the perfect director for this because she can handle the level of poetry coupled with the level of violence that is in the novel, and it just kind of, it has Mary Herron written all over it, and I think Sarah knew that, and I think she wanted to go to a really experienced filmmaker, and also I think it was really great because Sarah wrote the entire show. She was able to kind of focus on the story and the book and remaining true to the kind of narrative that exists in the book. And then Mary was able to really focus on adapting it into this series. And so having the two of them on set was really great because
we were both on set for it.
Yeah, at times, Sarah came for important sequences like the hypnotism and the interviews between Simon and Grace. She was there for because she could really track this kind of larger element, whereas Mary and I were focusing more on performance or on how she was going to shoot it and how it was going to look. So it was kind of like the three of us were charting this very complex character and story together as a team.
Now I want to talk about essentially it's the first shot of the series, and it's beautiful. It's just your face, really. I mean, it's the first or second shot, excuse me. It's intercut with a few other shots. With this incredible narration from you about what people project onto you. And now it's the idea that people project these things onto you because they think of you as a criminal, but they're also projecting these things onto you because you're a woman. So they project everything that a society projects onto a woman onto you because of your notoriety. And you're just making a blank expression. I'm wondering, when you were doing that shot, did they tell you that this was going to be the opening shot, that it was going along with this narration, and you were thinking about that, or was it cut in from somewhere else?
It was something that always existed in the script, and it was something that Sarah wrote and isn't in the novel. And it was something that I was always really afraid of.
I can imagine.
When I read it, because I think especially the way that it was written, it seemed as if Grace was going to transform into this inhuman female demon. And I thought, how am I going to do that? Are we going to use visual effects? Is this how am I going to embody those different characters?
You're gonna change facially.
Yeah, and it was something that at one point I had actually asked Mary to cut. I said, can we cut this? I think it's corny, or I don't like it. I don't know how to do it. How are we going to do it? And then Sarah kind of said no, and she said no, and we all sat together and talked about it, and kind of came up with the idea that it's really just about that time where you are looking in the mirror and you're looking at yourself and you're playing with all the ideas that you have of who you are and all of the things that you've been told about yourself, whether they're positive things or criticisms. And so it's this reflective moment. But when I watched the show and I saw that sequence and saw how it tied into the whole narrative, it made me really excited. And it's one of the sequences that I'm most proud of, because I think that there is this motif of a woman looking in a mirror throughout the history of images, in art history, in cinema. That image comes up over and over again of a young woman looking at herself in the mirror. And traditionally, that image has always been created by a man, and it's about emblems of female beauty or vanity. And in this instance, I think Sarah and Mary open that idea up and say, Grace is going to sit comfortably in every single thing that has been projected onto her. And in so doing, it's going to make you very, very unsettled and unsure of who she is. And so they open up this classic thing that we've seen over and over and over again, and they bring in this kind of female subjectivity, and they invite you into this huge exploration of the character. So it ended up being one of my favorite things.
Well, what I think is incredible...
Even though I wanted to cut it at one point.
Of course, we always want to not do the thing that we know is the most challenging for us, or that we don't have a grasp on,
100%.
Because then it's just, especially for an actor, you're like, am I just going to walk into an embarrassment because I don't really know what I'm grasping onto here?
Exactly. And I think that is something that I really learned on this project, was this idea of facing the things that you're most afraid of, or the things that make you feel the most uncomfortable, and not being afraid of talking about them with your director or the writer, and why they make you feel uncomfortable, and kind of arriving in this place where you feel as though you can accept that challenge. And that was a big learning experience for me.
I'm curious, I'm not going to stay on this scene too long, the opening shot of the film, but what direction did they end up giving you when the cameras started rolling? Because what I loved about it was that it's mostly a blank expression. Mm-hmm. It's this blank expression while all of the projections are being told to the audience.
Mm-hmm. Well, we decided. Mary came up with a great way of shooting it. She said, "We're just gonna, we're gonna do it in the mirror, and we're going to we recorded a lot of the voiceover because there's a lot of narration throughout the show. And so we recorded it all before we went to camera. And then when we were on set, she would be able to play chunks of the narration. And she played that narration over the moments where I'm looking in the mirror. And so I actually could hear my own voice. And it made it deeply intimate. And I think that the shifts are really subtle. And I think that that's kind of the point, because it's an intimate moment between Grace and herself and the many versions of herself.
No, we talk about projections on so much of this show, I think, not just in that scene, is about the projections onto women, specifically in the relationship that you have with the doctor that's interviewing you. He is essentially trying to find out if you're this person that he's been told, or if your character is this person that he's been told she is, and he's getting a different idea by getting to know someone intimately. And in many ways, it's a representation of getting to know a woman differently than the idea of what we think of as women. Because so much of this is about, I mean, it's Margaret Atwood. It's how a patriarchal society defines, treats, and abuses women in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that one thing that I loved so much about the book was the relationship between Simon Jordan and the shift in power that they experience throughout their interviews with each other. And as much as Grace is feeling repressed, or as much as she could be lying because she needs to be fulfilling some kind of role based on what the gender expectations are of her time, so is Simon, and he's feeling the repression and the kind of feeling boxed in by what his expectations are of him because of his class and because of his gender. And I think that,
like, what he's allowed to feel about her or come to a conclusion of.
Yeah, and how he can express himself, and that comes out in the way that he treats his landlady, Mrs. Humphreys, and the way that he abuses her and displaces all the feelings that he has of of sexuality or frustration that he has with Grace. He then is able to kind of alleviate them and put them on Mrs. Humphreys, which I always thought was so. I'd never seen that in a novel before, that kind of honest portrayal of how sometimes men feel they can treat a certain woman one way and another woman a different way and another woman another way. And that, Margaret really explores that. So it's not even just about Grace's repression, it's about Simon's repression too.
Well, we see that, not to draw a very clear line, but I think we've seen that in the last year as many men come forward after hearing about coworkers or others of sexual abuse and say, well, I have daughters, I wouldn't allow that. And it's like, well, why did you allow it with coworkers and didn't do anything about it, but you talk about your daughters in this different way?
Exactly, and I think that's why, good writing is good writing, and it kind of never goes out of fashion. I feel like you're always able to derive something from great writers, and I think Margaret is writing about the Victorian era, but it's completely relevant to today, and I think that's why we revisit novels over and over again at different points in our lives, and we're able to draw different things from them.
Now, you have an incredible scene in the middle of the series where you're hypnotized.
Yes.
Talk about that scene.
Speaking of repression, I was researching the time period and doing my work as an actor kind of in prep, and I didn't really realize how much spiritualism was so popular and was this popular movement in the Victorian era, especially among middle-class women. And there's this big hypnosis scene in the middle of the show, or near the end of the show, and it's really this time where Grace is able to kind of unleash everything that she is potentially feeling or thinking. And again, it kind of goes to what I was speaking about this kind of motif of the woman looking in the mirror. It speaks to that motif of the veiled woman, and the veiled woman being this, icon of a virgin or icon of a country, and in this moment, Mary and Sarah choose to make Grace terrifying and deeply unsettling, and that was really, I love that sequence. I love the way it's shot, and to prepare for it, I asked my dad to hypnotize me, because he is
Your dad a hypnotist?
He's not a hypnotist, but he is a cognitive behavioral therapist, and he studied hypnosis. So I said to him, Dad, can you hypnotize me? Because I want to film it so I can see what I look like and what happens to my body language and all these things. So My mom and dad came over on the weekend when we were shooting.
Were you worried that they would ask you things that maybe you didn't want to tell them?
I mean, no, I have a very trusting relationship with my dad.
Yeah, you're not like 16.
I wouldn't have asked
You're not going to
him.
be like,
Yeah.
the pot is in my sock drawer. You know?
Exactly. So they came over, and it took a long time for me to get into that suggestive state, because the whole time I was thinking, my dad's trying to hypnotize me. My dad's trying to hypnotize me. But eventually it happened, and it was a really cool thing. And I kind of ran to set on Monday and showed Zachary, Levi, and Simon. I was like, look, you have to see this. My dad hypnotized me, and this is what happens, and this is what you have to do. So it was really cool.
How long? So wait, we're gonna get stuck on this for a second. How long did it take to get into that state? Because I've always wanted to be hypnotized, but I've always worried that I would just sit there forever and be like, clear your mind, clear your mind. It's not getting cleared. Clear your.
You know what it's like? It's I was aware of what was happening, but I wasn't necessarily aware of how much time had passed. I think it was like 45 minutes. And so I had no real concept of time. But it's kind of like a guided meditation. And once you get into that suggestive state, it's just kind of like a guided meditation. That's what I would compare it to.
Now, this show is very much a Canadian production. You have Sarah Polley. You are Canadian as well. David Cronenberg is in it. Mary's not Canadian, though, is she?
Yeah.
Oh, she is?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that, because I think because of American Psycho and I Shot Andy Warhol,
she's lived in New York forever, so.
Yeah. So
you can have her. She can be from New York.
What was it like getting the chance to work to sort of create this with all of your fellow countrymen?
It was, like I said, I'd looked up to Sarah for so long, and she collaborates with such cool people that I knew it would be a huge honor to be able to be a part of it. And when she told me on set one day, she came up to me and she said, I really want David Cronenberg to play Veringer. Will you email him? And
you've been in 3 of his movies.
Yeah, and ask him. And I thought, okay, yeah. And then I thought, that's a really interesting role for him, too, because Veringer in the novel and in the show is really Grace's advocate. And David has always really been an advocate for me in my career. So I was like, oh, very meta, Sarah. So then I emailed him and I said, David, Sarah Polley really wants you to be in the show. And just so you know, we offered Margaret a role, but you have like way more lines than her. So I think you should do it. And he did.
So wait, how has, outside of, casting you in his last 3 movies, how has David sort of been a big advocate for you?
Well, I think that he has always been kind of like a mentor. I think that, and also I started working with him at a time in my life where I was, kind of confused about the kind of work that I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it. And he is just an artist with the most integrity, and he's never really been swayed by the industry or succumbed to any of the hype of the industry, and he's always just kind of existed on this island making these films that are important to him, but at the same time they touch so many people all over the world at many different levels of filmmaking. And so it was really important for me to see that I could just choose whatever kind of career I wanted to have, and it didn't have to be ascribed to me by somebody else.
Which is absolutely true. You look over your IMDb, and I think, really probably since you started working with David, the selection of filmmakers that you're working with and projects that you're taking part in are really the best of the best. Real artists.
Yeah, and I've been able to work with his son, Brandon, on a film, and Caitlin, who's an incredible fashion photographer. We worked together a number of times, and I feel as though I really found my kind of voice and my real kind of core of my identity as an artist through my work with them.
That's so interesting. Where do you feel like, do you think this happened on A Dangerous Method when you first worked with him, or, like Cosmopolis?
Maybe. I think it was more in the promotion of A Dangerous Method when I kind of saw, how many people the film reached and how David, composed himself, how he took press seriously, how he spoke about his work, the thoughtfulness that went into it, and how he treated everybody around him.
He's one of the most articulate directors, about his work. Oftentimes you talk to directors and it's very instinctual and it's hard for them to really articulate the point of everything that was placed into the story or put on film, and Cronenberg is extremely articulate and meticulous about every
Yeah,
decision
I call
made.
his filmmaking almost surgical.
He was a doctor, right? At one, or he studied to be a doctor, I believe.
Oh, maybe. I don't know. But also, the thing about him is that he's also the nicest person. And he is so kind to everybody who works on his films. And everybody that works with him ends up working with him over and over and over again. And I think that's the sign of a great filmmaker and also a good person.
Was working with him when you did it direct your taste a certain way? Because you were fairly young when you started working with him. Was that at the beginning of sort of directing your tastes more towards I don't want to say art house work, but
Yeah, I don't know if it was necessarily him. At the time, I was studying film theory and criticism at U of T.
Good for you.
And and that's kind of when I discovered, auteur filmmaking, and I became really director driven, and I wasn't necessarily responding to the different kind of roles or cinematic tropes that were being kind of, tossed my way. And it was really kind of like working in David's films that I was able to kind of find a space in cinema that I felt really comfortable inhabiting because of where I was at in my learning and in my development, and not necessarily because somebody told me I was at that place.
Yeah. You must have been really excited when you got Indignation and you got to sort of subvert all those cinematic tropes that are usually presented to actresses.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that's so incredible about James as a writer and a filmmaker, is that he took a character that on the page was actually very thin and opened it up and made her this kind of very complicated and wonderful Olivia, and I got to play her, which was really great.
Yeah. Let's get some questions from the audience. Who has a question right here? Whoa.
Canada.
I was just going to say it. The show's
Represent.
amazing. You talked about it a little bit, but just the aspect of mental health in this show, how much of it was a discussion, especially in relation to mental health and women in that era?
It was something that we discussed a lot, and I read Freud's A Case of Hysteria, which was a huge kind of eye-opener for me in terms of the perspective on women at that time from the mental health community. And of course, Freud, A Case of Hysteria, was written just after the time period that Simon and Grace were sitting down and having their discussions. But I think that kind of thinking was very prevalent in our discussions about the character. And it was interesting because Sarah and Mary spent a long time searching for the perfect Simon. And one of the reasons why Edward was so perfect for the role was because he was able to kind of access that kind of Freudian demeanor, but he was also able to kind of shed that and become a really wonderful, empathetic listener. And I think that he kind of bounces between those two roles really well, so that you don't completely hate him throughout the show, but you're kind of unsure of him, and you like him and you don't like him, and you kind of go on the same journey with Simon as you do with Grace. Thanks, that's a great question.
Next question.
Hi. So this show is very similar to like The Handmaid's Tale with the theme of female identity.
Yeah.
So I was wondering what you thought about it when you read the script or when you watched the show back, what that means to you.
I mean, it means everything to me. I think that it's amazing that these two shows get to coexist in the same TV year. I thought maybe at one point, when we promote our show, people are going to take the attitude like, that's enough now. We've had our female story of the year. And no, seriously, it was something that I was concerned about, but it's been really the antithesis of that experience. It's been more that people are hungry for that. People want those stories. And I feel like that's why, at this point in popular culture, Margaret's writing is having this kind of renaissance, and it's really resonating with people. But I think particularly to speak about The Handmaid's Tale, it's fantastic because it's a look at this kind of dystopian future and where we're potentially headed in terms of gender politics. And Alias Grace is this look back at where we've come from in terms of immigration and gender politics. And we're in this space right now in the middle, and we feel very unsure about where we're headed. And so I think that to have these projects kind of bookend our anxiety that we're feeling right now is that it's very poignant. It's why I love film. It's why I love television. It's why I'm so grateful that streaming platforms are giving women the resources and the space to be sharing their voices right now. It's a really positive, incredible thing that we're witnessing right now. So it makes me really excited.
I think we're seeing, I mean, me personally, the story of the straight white man, for the most part, has been done. I am, as a straight white man, I'm bored by the story of the straight white man. I think a lot of people are. We want to see stories about different people.
But it was, to speak to that, it was so great to see the men in our show come to set and advocate for their characters as well. Kerr Logan, who plays McDermott, he kind of came to set and said, I don't want to just be an angry man. I want to know why this person is angry, and I want to make this character just as three-dimensional as Grace is. And he, in my opinion, he made sense of a character that I didn't really even understand on the page when I read the novel. I didn't really get his perspective. I didn't really feel as though he was totally fleshed out. And he came to set and opened this character up and made him deeply compelling. And I think that it's not just a space for complicated women, it's a space for complicated men and their relationship to each other.
Next question.
Hi, over here.
Hi.
I was wondering what your process for getting into Grace Marks' character was, and if having the novel as a reference made it easier or harder.
I think having the novel was easier in this particular instance, because Sarah had been living with the novel inside of her for decades. And so she had this kind of knowledge of the source material that you would never get from somebody who just decided to adapt a novel. I was so obsessed with the novel when I was preparing that I read it a number of times, and I even in one crazy fit of prep started writing the differences between the novel and the screenplay and trying to figure out what was left out and why. Everything that Sarah changed or left out, it was done in such a seamless way. So I think that it's interesting because you don't always do that with an adaptation. Sometimes I think it's really important to put the adaptation aside or the book aside and say, okay, now this is going to become something different. But I really believe that this show is so connected to the book that reading the book and reading the book several times was important for me to find Grace.
Sarah, congratulations on the show.
Thank
I love
you.
it. Well, the miniseries, really, right?
Yeah.
It's how many episodes?
6 episodes.
And they're all on Netflix right now.
Oh my God.
And guys, if you haven't seen her work with David Cronenberg, go back and watch those 3 movies. I feel like they're kind of undiscovered Cronenberg movies that people are going to go back and find and really love, especially Maps to the Stars. It's a wild ride.
Yeah, if you finish Alias Grace, which you have to finish first.
Yes, absolutely.
Then you can
go back and watch
go down the
her
rabbit
work.
hole.
Yeah. Sarah Gadon, everybody, give her a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you.